This year I had a lot of things planned, and I can say for certain that one of those things that I had planned was, well, YouTube and making videos and complaining about the warframes that I like and the ones that I don't like. But, you know, I. Life. Life has a way of kind of screwing people
It's
over,
that time again,
and
dream.
I have been
So let's
thoroughly
get back to it.
struck by life's way of screwing people over. But, anyways, ignoring all that, today we talk about Limbo in depth. Because personally, I believe that Limbo is one of those frames that's actually pretty well designed. He has very few flaws in regards to his kit design in and of itself. So I guess the flaw really lies within the scaling and a few minor issues that you might spot here and there. But otherwise, he's an all in all good frame. So, you know, check him out when you have the time. Aside from being a little bit complicated to learn, he's a good frame to play with. Now then, let's see how we can discuss Limbo. Alright, so, discussing Limbo. The first thing that I have to discuss, as is, standard with discussing anything, is his abilities and how they work. First and foremost, his passive. So his passive allows him to press shift or whatever your dodge button is on to enter the rift. And entering the rift basically makes you invulnerable, but it's a little bit more complicated than simply invulnerability. And as the passive description says, it leaves behind a small rift portal that lasts for 5 seconds, and while you're in the rift, you regain your energy, and killing enemies gives you even more energy, but you have to be in the rift. This ties into his entire kit, and so yeah, it's definitely a really good passive. And it makes it so that he doesn't really need to worry too much about energy, so you can sacrifice a good amount of energy mods, and just focus on maybe something like Streamlined. You don't even really need Flow, just get Streamlined so his abilities cost less. But moving off from that, let's get into his first ability, Banish. So what this does is it forces enemies in a cone in front of you into the rift. It staggers them and it traps them there for a set duration, and the amount of enemies that get hit by it is determined by the range. And as I said, it is a cone, so don't think you can banish people behind you. It's just a cone in front of you. Stasis. This is considered his most important crowd controlling ability because this basically stops time within the rift. So anywhere the rift is in existence, any creature within the rift is stopped. So keep that in mind. And this scales entirely off duration. Just duration and only duration. And then Rift Surge, another really useful and really amazing ability. Rift Surge is basically what it does. You charge enemies with Rift energy, and then when you banish them from the Rift, or when the duration of them being trapped in the Rift runs out, they get sent back into the Rift immediately and pull all nearby enemies into the Rift with them. So, it's pretty useful. And then his 4, Cataclysm. You basically use a lot of energy to create a massive void sphere that it opens a pocket dimension in the real world that is a portion of the rift. And yeah, the explanation doesn't do it much justice. It's better to demonstrate with these. So I'm gonna demonstrate with these. This is my current build. It's nothing too crazy. Ignore the prime flow. I haven't really tweaked this build much, but it works for most of my Limbo gameplay. So the first thing to note is Limbo in and of himself is very complicated, and a lot of people struggle to understand how to play him. So that's the first thing we need to get out of the way. So let's start with the most obvious thing, the rift. And as I was explaining earlier, it's a lot more complicated than just going into another dimension. And as I've said, I'm not. Many people have gone in depth on how Limbo works, so I'm not gonna do that. I'm just gonna give you a bare bones, really basic, simple explanation of how he works and what he does. So, this is the rift portal that gets left behind when you dodge into the rift. And as you can see, your screen is a little tiny bit different when you're in the rift. Everything becomes a little like paler, I guess. And when you leave, they become more colorized. And as I said earlier, this is the rift that you leave behind. Your teammates can enter the rift through this. Also, when your teammates are in the rift, they can leave by dashing, just like how you can leave by dashing. It's meant to make it so your teammates don't get irritated by accidentally walking into one of these. So, they can get out on their own without you letting them out. Now, let me show you some properties of the rift. First, I am going to unpause the AI, and, yeah. So, behold, the enemies are mad at me. They can see me, but they cannot attack or damage me. Nothing they do works, because I am not on the same plane of existence as these guys. We are on completely different planes of existence. As such, nothing from their plane can affect my plane, so yeah, I'm fine. But if I leave the rift, that's a different story. As you can wait, that's really oh god! As you saw, I got decimated in a matter of seconds because yeah, well, yep, I'm dead. I died. Yeah, so leaving the rift as Limbo, not a good idea since his survivability isn't the best in the world, and it's not advised to build it to be the best in the world. So that's a thing. That's why I put rolling guard on mine. It's kind of weird, but it's a contingency for if I accidentally leave the rift. Anyways, now let's get into other properties. So let's say, for example, I banish a group of enemies into the rift, which I'm gonna do real quick, and then enter. These enemies are now in the same plane of existence as I am. As such, their attacks will damage me. So, how would you deal with this? You stop them using stasis. And that is how you use Limbo. I'm thinking about Loki because my wife. But that's how you manage and monitor enemies as Limbo. And then, this is where Rift Surge comes in. All the enemies that are already inside the rift are now, charged with rift energy. So, if they were to, for example, get timed out of the rift due to the duration, or if I force them out, kind of like that, they get pulled back in, and they pull in a couple enemies nearby as well. So, this is where the whole Limbo being complicated thing comes in, because you have to know how to monitor and manage all this stuff, and it gets pretty tedious. And what a lot of people like to say is Limbo's most important ability is this one, Cataclysm, because it brings a portion of the rift into the real world. But I beg to differ. I mean, it is useful and really important because you can get as many people in the rift as possible, but sometimes it's not the amount of people in the rift. You need to be able to manage your rift. Just as much as you need to have a lot of people in it, you also need to be able to manage it. If your rift is so huge that you can't even track all the enemies that are in it, then it's kind of pointless to have it at that point. If it's ginormous and you can't even see all the enemies that are in it, it's kind of useless. So having a smaller, more easily controllable rift is the wisest thing to do. And having weapons that are the opposite of the Ignis Wraith, that allow you to do quick and high amounts of damage are also really good. So things like bow and arrows, snipers, that stuff, really good for Limbo since you get to take your time. And Limbo, his entire playstyle encourages taking your time and playing by yourself. So his kit is definitely what I would consider to be one of the best kits in Warframe, because it's well designed, well thought out, and it's super intricate, and, well, in general good. And the augments add to the already good nature of his kit. So why would I even propose reworking Limbo if he's already fine? Well, that's the thing. The only thing I really want to change about Limbo is his passive. I think if Limbo were to have a passive that's just slightly different, it would be a lot better, and change a few mechanics of the Rift in and of itself. So that's what I'm gonna discuss now. The first thing on my proverbial list is, well, wait, is proverbial the word I'd use there? I don't know if proverbial is the right word. But anyways, the first thing on my list is why can enemies outside of the rift see Limbo while he's in the rift? The rift is supposed to be an alternate dimension. It doesn't make sense. Why can these enemies see through dimensions? It's kind of weird to me. I mean, if there was some provided explanation, I'd be fine with it. But there isn't any, and it's kind of just a thing that the enemies can do for some reason. And we're kind of just expected to accept that. I refuse to accept that because it just makes no sense to me. The enemies can, for some reason, see me in an alternate dimension. No. So if that's the first thing I'd like to see changed, just enemies not being able to see Limbo while he's in the rift. It makes far too much sense to ignore it. So, you know, it'd be a reasonable change, and I don't think it would make his playstyle too different anyways. Like, they already can't damage you in the rift, so, might as well just make it so you're invisible in there too. Right? It kind of just works. I mean, yeah, technically, Eximus units can damage you while you're in the rift, but majority of the time you kind of just avoid them by running away anyways. So it really doesn't make much of a difference at the end of the day. So, you know, maybe I'm just stupid, but I think it makes a lot more sense for enemies to not be able to see you. Now, the next thing I'd want as a change is to be able to drag enemies into the rift whilst you're already in the rift. So, for example, like I am now, I'm inside the rift. It would be cool if you could drag enemies who are outside of the rift into the rift whilst being close to them. As like a whole little system thing that allows for, more easy ways of getting enemies into the rift. Because as it is right now, getting an enemy into the rift is incredibly tedious. Because you have to come out of the rift in order to get an enemy into the rift. And when you come out, you leave yourself vulnerable. You can potentially die, which is the opposite of what you want if your goal is to survive. So, it becomes problematic when you put yourself at risk of dying. So that would be my suggestion. Naturally, this would be tied to the passive, and it would have like a decently long cooldown, but it would be a cool way to kind of, for Limbo players to start off their whole damage dealing thing. At least in my opinion. And it wouldn't be too hard, in my opinion, to add either. Just a simple, when you're close to certain enemies, you can pull them into the rift. Whether it's by tying it to your one ability or something, you can pull enemies into the rift. Now, the final thing I think should be added is damage. Limbo doesn't deal much damage. That's fine. I completely get why he doesn't, because he's meant to be more of a He's meant to be more of a tactician type Warframe. So, I can kind of understand why he's not dealing much damage. You're supposed to focus on using your weapons to deal as much damage as possible and pick off the enemies whilst in the rift. I completely agree with that playstyle. Now, my problem lies in the lore for Limbo himself. You see, Limbo's lore talks a little bit about what happened to him, the original Limbo. And what happened to the original Limbo is he died from one of his rift entrances, or whatever. He died from one of them, and, he got literally ripped to pieces by that event. So, it stands to reason that it's pretty well known that even the weakest HP and shield Warframe is much stronger than your average Grineer and Corpus, because they are Warframes. They are creatures or beings made to literally be killing machines, ripping through hordes of these guys like butter. As I'm sure you've noticed, I've been slowly picking them off one by one. I mean, yeah, they're paused, but still, Warframes are designed to do things like this, and as such, they excel at it. And one of their many traits is their tough bodies, their skin turned into sword steel. That's a next level toughness. So, a Warframe being ripped to shreds by entering a dimension, I'd say that's pretty extreme. And this is something that happened on accident. So, in theory, using something like Banish, Rift Surge, and even Cataclysm on enemies should tear them apart. Banish literally forces them into another dimension. Literally being shoved into another dimension. No preparation or anything, you just get pushed into it. Like, I doubt any regular creature would be able to survive something like that. Now, I'm not saying it should be a one shot, but what I am saying is it should hit really hard. And I would say at the very least it should be able to deal a percentage of an enemy's HP. Scaling based off obviously percentage and how much power strength you invest in. Since most Limbo builds don't have much power strength to begin with, it's probably not even going to be that much of a big deal when it's added, but it would lead to a lot more build diversity for Limbo. So people can make percent damage focus build. It would scale based on percent damage and cap out at around 50%, which is nothing too crazy in my opinion. I mean, most bosses and stuff have some way of dealing with percent damage anyways, so at the end of the day it won't really mean much to them. And most bosses and such are already resistant to the effects of the rift as well, so it doesn't really matter to them. So what I would say for sure is, at the very least, it could deal a maximum of 50% damage, and so when you banish an enemy, they lose half of their HP. Now, that's just for the initial banish. Any consecutive banishes on said enemy will not cause them to lose any more percent HP. Instead, it will just deal damage scaling based off your power strength. Not percentage, just regular ability damage. So, I think that way it's, nothing too crazy. It's pretty fair. It's just a one-time, high damage action as a means of kind of lowering the enemies, and since it was their first time being exposed to Limbo's Rift, now any consecutive casts, they are prepared for it, and they expect it, so it no longer hurts them as much. So, now this is where I talk about Rift Surge, and how I, think that should work. I think it would make sense for Rift Surge to have a bit higher scaling, but not too much higher, so call it like 75% is the max. It is you forcing a boatload of other dimensional energy into these poor souls. So, yeah. But what I've come to realize is if you do that, then the enemy will, they won't exactly be alive anymore, and it kind of defeats the purpose. So, one of the only solutions that I was able to come up with to this, even though I still wanted to deal percentage damage, is that if you hit the enemy with a percentage damage from Banish, then that ability goes on cooldown, and Rift Surge is no longer able to apply its percentage damage, if that makes sense. And so then, since the Rift Surge would not be able to apply its percentage damage, you can use it on the group of enemies that you've pulled in, and then you can banish them, and by the time, you've, banished them from the Rift, they get pulled back in due to Rift Surge, and they, pull in the nearby enemies. And those nearby enemies are also now affected by Rift Surge, because Rift Surge has like a spreading effect of sorts. And so you can kind of like... Am I missing? What? Is this enemy just glitched? Oh no, it's on a... God, it's... I feel so stupid. It was just on a different plane. I can't believe I didn't recognize that. But as I was saying before I got distracted, it basically allows for you to kill enemies a lot easier without being too overpowered. I mean, you can comment on it and tell me if you think it's stupid, but I think it's decently fair, nothing too overpowered. At least not as overpowered as Revenant, who can, one-shot even level cap enemies. So, that's a that's a Warframe that definitely exists. He also has iframes, or I guess invulnerability. So that's certainly a warframe of the century. He's full-on invulnerable, and he can deal percentage damage, and he's never been nerfed. Well, not to my knowledge. Well, he hasn't been nerfed recently. Not to my knowledge, but he's ridiculous. Okay, Revenant is crazy strong. Anyways, the next video I'll do is either going to be on Roblox or on warframes that I think are perfect. The examples that I can give right now are Harrow and Caliban. Video is going to be a lot longer than this one, probably, because I'm going to discuss Harrow and Caliban in some serious detail, because I think their kits are some of the pinnacle of what Warframe can achieve. Especially Harrow. Especially Harrow. But Caliban he's been popping up and raising on my radar slowly but surely as I play with him more. He's definitely a good frame. Crazy good frame, for that matter. He has so much potential in what he can do. You just have to build him right. But anyways, that's it for today's video. Thank you for watching, and look forward to seeing you guys around.